Today's daf is daf pei, and we're up to Omer of Papa on the third line. What do we have until now? We're dealing with the case of a koi. The Gemara is now assuming that a koi is a hybrid between a deer and a goat. A goat is a behema, a deer is a chaya. And they mated, and the Gemara is assuming right now that they could have an offspring. And it could go in two different directions. It could be that the male is the deer, or it could be that the female is the deer. Either way. In any event, this issue, the Gemara establishes as to what the status of this hybrid, of this koi is relevant to three different areas. It's relevant to oso vespino. It's relevant to matonos that are given to the kohen from a karbo, which is called zrol l'chayim v'keva, and it's relevant to the iser chelet. And what we learned was that there are two issues that will impact on the status of koi. One is called chosheshin lizera ha'av or ein chosheshin lizera ha'av. Do we consider the lineage of the offspring to be related to its father, its male parent, or only to its female parent? There's no question that it is related to its female, its mother. Question is whether it's related to its father. And the Gemara concludes that both the Rabbanan and Rabbi Lazar are in agreement that we have a suffix. We don't know whether or not Choshen Lizera Av or not. So in every case, we're going to have to consider the possibility that there is lineage to the father or that there's no lineage to the father. So on that issue, there's no machlokas. Where is the machlokas between Rabbi Lazar and the Chachamim, Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim? That's with regard to what's called se miktsaseh or se velo miktsaseh. And the same thing with regard to tzvi, miktsas tzvi, and so forth. Meaning that if you have a mixed lineage, but on the mother's side, there is a seh. So even though if I hold choshen lezera av, the offspring is only a mixas seh, it's only partially seh from the maternal lineage, but not from the paternal lineage. Nevertheless, the Torah would consider that a seh. That's one opinion. That's going to be the opinion of the Chachamim. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is that no, you need kol seh. It's not enough that you have a mixas seh, and the mother of this offspring is a seh, but you need that the entire lineage should be a seh, which would only make sense if you say ein chosheshin lezera ha'av, because once we exclude the father, the paternal lineage, we're left with the maternal lineage alone. And then you could have a kulo seh. But as we said before, with regard to choshen lezera ha'av or not, we have a suffix. So now we have Omer of Papa. Papa is now going to sort of give us an overview of all the different dinim according to the various shitos, meaning the machlok shin Rabbi Eliezer and Chacham. Hilkach. Le'inyon kisi adam umatonos. Now let's keep in mind that with regard to matonos, the Torah speaks about sharos seh, which are behemos. With regard to kisi adam, the Torah speaks about ayal, yachmor, and tzvi, and so forth, which are chayos. So kisi adam depends upon chaya, whereas matanos depends upon behema. And where is this machlokes? Lo mishkachas elo b'tzvi haba al ataisha. It's only going to be in one direction, which means that a male deer was mated with a female goat. So the mother is clearly a behema, a goat. The father, if v'choshesh v'zera av, insofar as the father is a deer, which is a chaya, then the offspring is half behema, half chaya. That's the hybrid of a koi. And in this case, the bein l'Rabbanan ubein l'Rabbi Eliezer mesafkale choshen l'zera av olo. So there's no machlokes about the fact that we don't really know the status of a hybrid. We're not sure if we should be concerned with the paternal lineage from the father or not. So where is the machlokes? The komiflige, they're arguing about beseh afilu miktaseh. So in other words, the Rabbanan accepted the principle of seh afilu miktaseh, and Rabbi Eliezer rejected that principle. He holds you need kol seh. So now, if you have the case of a koi, it's now considered a miktaseh on the tzad, on the side that we assume that choshen l'zera av, because the offspring was produced by the male father, who's a deer. And that would mean that the offspring is only a mixaseh if we're choshesh l'zera av, because it's only on the mother's side that it's a seh. So the Rabbanan are now going to say that we don't know what the law is as far as kisi adam. Why? Because as far as kisi adam, everything depends upon whether it's a chaya or not. The Torah only imposed the obligation of kisi adam on a chaya. But nevertheless, even though the father of this offspring is indeed a deer, which would make the offspring into a chaya, but that would only make sense if we were choshesh l'zera ha'av. So now we have this suffix, whether choshen l'zera av or ein choshen l'zera av. So let's talk about kisi adam on yontif. The problem with kisi adam on yontif, as we learned in the previous daf, is because you have to dig up the ground in order to do kisi adam, and that's a malacha of grinding, so that if you're allowed to shecht on yontif, but you have to realize that if you shecht on yontif, you now, if it's a chaya, you're now chayav in kisi adam. But we won't allow you to override the yontif unless we're certain that it's a chaya. But we don't have certainty that it's a chaya, because as we said before, it's only a chaya on the father's side, and we're not sure if we consider the father's side. However, if we're dealing with not kisi adam, but rather with matanos, and matanos depends upon behema, because the Torah says se oshar, then according to the Rabbanan, what we're going to have is, on half of the matanos, we have a vadai, because se afilu mixaseh, according to the Rabbanan. So there's definitely a mixaseh, because the mother is a goat, which is a behema. On the other half, though, we don't know. Why? Because if we're choshesh l'zera av, then from the perspective of zera ha'av, the vlad is a chaya and not a behema. So therefore, the Rabbanan are going to say that you have to split the value of the matanos of Zrol Chayayim v'Kohen that have to be given to the Kohen, and on the tzad that is a half a seh, then you have to give half the matanos for the half a seh. We cannot consider it as a full seh because we have to be choshesh l'zera av mitzad suffik. Rabbi Loza, on the other hand, is going to say that there is no such thing as seh afilu chatzi seh, but rather seh means they have to be a total seh. And now, if we have to determine whether this offspring is a total seh, we can't do so because we have a suffix, maybe choshen l'zera av. So here's where we're going to implement the halacha of hamotzi v'chaver l'varaya. When the Kohen comes to collect his matanos, the Bailim are going to say to the Kohen, you have to prove that this is a full-fledged seh, and that we hold ein choshen l'zera'av. You can't prove that because the halach itself has established that choshen l'zera'av or not is a suffix. So therefore, you can't prove your point and establish your claim. Therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you would not have to give any portion of the Zro L'Chayim to the Kohen. Le'inyan also vespino. This is the third area in which we have to determine the status of the Kohen. Mishkachas la. Here, says Rav Papa, could go in both directions. Bein b'tayish habol atzvio, bein b'tzvi habol atayish. It matters not whether or not the male goat was the father, mated with a female deer that was the mother, or the reverse. The deer father, the father was a deer, and the mother was a goat. And let's go through both scenarios, says Rav Papa. B'tayish haba al atzvia. If we have a case where the father of the offspring is a tayish, tayish is a male goat, and tzvi is a female deer, so the mother now is a female deer, we can say that there's a mikzah seh, but only if we assume that choshen l'zera'ah. Because on the mother's side, she is a deer, she's a chaya, and the Torah says with regard to Osav Espino, seh, shor, oseh. So it's got to be a behemo and not a chaya. Therefore, the Rabbanan Savri, since they hold, and on this point also Rabbi Eliezer agrees that Dilma Choshen L'Zera Av. So therefore, what we have here is a chashash that maybe this offspring is miyuchas, is related to its father. The father, we said, was a goat. And therefore we have mikzah seh. And now if you shecht the offspring of this offspring, or the mother of this offspring, or the father of this offspring, possibly, on the same day, then you violate the Isur Lav of Osav Espino, but you can't get Malchus. And why can't you get Malchus? Because we don't know whether Choshen L'Zera Av or not. And if we're going to say that Ein Choshen L'Zera Av, we said in this case, the goat was the male father, and if Ein Choshen L'Zera Av, then you don't even have mikzah seh. So the Isur of Osav Espino is going to kick in on a suffix level, and it's going to be Li Isura. And that's what he says here, Papa B'taish Habal Atzvia Uli Isura. And why is that so? Because if we're going to be Choshesh, L'Zera Ha'av, and the Zera Ha'av is a Tayish, which is a Behema, meaning it's Shor and Seh, then we have Mikzah Seh. And Rabbanan hold Mikzah Seh, Havi Seh. And therefore, it's Osir, but you don't get Malchus. But Rabbi Eliezer Sovar, Nehi Nami, even if I'll say on that side of the suffix that Choshen L'Zera Av, and therefore maybe we have a Mikzah Seh, because the father is a goat, Sev Afilu Mikzah Seh Lo Amrinon, he rejects Mikzah Seh. So therefore, there's no question in Rabbi Eliezer's mind that the offspring of this mixture between a male goat and a female deer is not included, it's completely excluded from Osav Espino B'Yom Echad. You'd be allowed to shecht the parent or the child, whichever direction you go, on the same day. Now Rav Papa goes on, and let's do the opposite scenario. B'tzvi haba al atayish. Now we have the mother is a female goat, which, as we said, for sure would create mikzah seh. There's no doubt about it. And therefore, according to the Rabbanon, I couldn't care less whether Choshen Lezera Av or Ein Choshen Zera Av, which remains an outstanding suffix, because in this case, the mother is a female goat. And therefore, abundant Savri Nehi Nami, even if you'll tell me, wait a minute, how can you give Malchus? Is Choshen Lezera Av is only a suffix? The answer is, I couldn't care less. Even if you'll tell me that Choshen Lezera Av, but on the mother's side, you have a goat. And a goat is a seh, and therefore it's included in mixas seh afilu mixas seh amrinon, and therefore malkinale. If he would go ahead and slaughter not only the koi but also its parent or its offspring on the same day, he definitely gets malchus. But Rabbi Lezer Savar, isura ika malchos leka. Now, why is there an isur here? Isura ika dilma. Ein choshen lezerav. If we isolate only the zera ha'em, on the maternal side, we have a seh. And therefore, hai seh mi'al yehu. So we can't allow you to shecht its mother or its child on the same day, because if we hold ein choshen lezerav, which is one side and a suffix, then what you have here is a seh. You have a seh, because the mother is a goat. But Malchus, like we can't give you Malchus here if you went and slaughtered on the same day the mother or the child, because Dilma Choshen Lezera Av, we have that other side in the suffix of Choshen Lezera Av. And if it's Choshen Lezera Av, then the mother's status as a behemoth, as Sharva says, only mixas seh. And Rabbi Lezer's of the opinion that seh, he doesn't accept this concept of mixas seh. So that's Rav Papa. Now we move on to Rav Yehuda. Now we said that a koi is a hybrid of both a behema and a chaya. However, Omar Rav Yehuda, koi birya b'fnei atzmahu. No, there's no possibility of crossbreeding a goat with a deer. It just won't work. Therefore, I have to conclude that a koi is a creature unto itself. And now we don't know what the status of this koi is. Apparently, it has the two simoni kashrus. It's got mafreses parsa and shosas shesa, but we don't know if it's a chaya or if it's a behema. Lo chriu bo chachamim im min behema hi im min chaya. So therefore, according to Rav Yehuda, with regard to all the dinim that we said before, we're going to always have to consider the koi as a suffix chaya, suffix behema. So, for example, on the side that it might be a behema, we can't shecht it on yontiv because of the issue of kisi adam, because the behema is not included in kisi adam. And as far as matnas kahuna is concerned, we're going to have to consider the suffix that maybe it's a chaya. And if it's a chaya, there is no matnas kahuna. Therefore, the kohen is going to be out in the cold, and he cannot collect chalayim v'keva from a koi. And as far as oso ves beno b'yom echad is concerned, it would depend upon mixas seh. But apparently, it's not even a mixas seh because it's a min bifnei atzma. It's a biri bifnei atzma. Let me just double check if he agrees with me here. That's how I learned the sugya. I don't see that he says anything one way or the other. Just give me a minute if you don't mind. Let's see. Oh, let's see the previous note here. He says, okay, so I'm going to leave that question on the back burners. What's the status of Osav Espino? I think you certainly would not be Chayiv Malchus, but the question is, would it be that maybe it's also? Yeah, I would be inclined to think that it is also. I retract what I said before because on the tzad that it's a behema, then it's included under sharvaseh. Okay, let's go on. Rav Nachman Omar, koi ze el habar. So I think el habar, if I'm not mistaken, is a kind of a ram that apparently occupies. Well, in any event, it's like a chaya in the sense that it's not a domesticated animal, it's a wild animal. Therefore, it's definitely chayav in kisei adam. You could shecht a koi on yontif and do kisei adam. So again, we're emphasizing the fact that it's el abar is a wild animal, and therefore it's a chaya. And now the Gemara is going to show how all these opinions are actually codified by a brisa. Kitanoi, koi, the first opinion, ze el habar, which is exactly what Rav Nachman said. However, the second opinion, Yeshomrim ze habar minatayish minatzvia, meaning it's a hybrid. Rabbi Yossi Omer, koi bir yufnei atzma, like we saw in Rav Yehuda. Now we have a fourth opinion, which we didn't have until now. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer min behemahi. It's definitely a behema, which would mean that it's included under Zrol Chayim V'Keva the Matnas Kahuna, which would mean that it's included under Oso Vespino, and you get Malchus for that. And it would mean that you're allowed to shecht it on Yontiv because there is no Chayiv of Kisi Adam. It's a behema. V'shel Beis Lushoy Hayu Megadlim Mehen Adorim. Okay, I don't know why the Bryce has to add this historical fact, but we go on. Amar Rav Zera, Amar Rav Hani Easy Debala. Now, I think the word bala means a forest. So you have goats that are to be found in the forests. I think it's called an ibex. Let's see if anybody says that here. He calls it in the English, he calls it a forest goat. Oh, look at that. He mentions ibex. Very good.
And that's a chaya?
Yeah. Now, what's the status of a forest goat? It says here that Hani easy de alok sheros legav mizbech. It's a behema. It's not a chaya. We don't bring a chaya on the mizbeach, so it must be a behema. So I guess it's even though it occupies the forests, but it's not wild. It can be domesticated, and it's basically a goat. So we call it an ibex because it is found in the forest, but it's really a goat. Savar law. So the last opinion that we had was Rav Hamnuna. Ki hadi Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Eser behemas mana kosev v'sulo. There are only 10 species of kosher animals. There's no 11 species. So if you find something that roams around the forest and it has both simoni kashrus, then you have to subsume it on one of the 10 behemos, vahani, and referring to these goats that occupy the forests. And they have simoni kashrus. Midalo kachoshev lehu bahari chayo. Since we call them a goat, and it doesn't appear in the Torah in the pasuk that delineates Chayos shmamina di ezninu. It's really another kind of a goat. Right, this reminds me of the whole suffix about buffalo. Is buffalo a shor or is it not a shor?
Right.
But assuming a buffalo has simoni kashrus, which I'm pretty darn sure it does, then it has to be subsumed under one of the above. There are 10, and we know that it's not a chaya, it's not listed as a chaya, it must be a shor, and therefore it's a subcategory of a shor. I was saying the same thing about these forest goats, easy to bala, that it's a goat. Maskifla Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, the Ema. Oh, now we get to the list of chayos in the Torah, and there were a number of creatures on that list, and we don't know how to identify them. Ema Ayil Utzvi Prat, Kol Be'ema Klal, Pratu Klal, Nasa Klal, Mosif Ala Prat, and Ikatuva. Why do you assume that there are only 10 species of kosher animals that have these two simonim? After all, the Torah starts by saying Ayal Utzvi, and then it says Kol Behema. So we have a principle called Nase Klal, Mosif Al Haprat. So even though the Prat has a list of all those 10, but now we have a Klal that says Kol Behema, and the Klal now indicates that there are other categories. So there may be many other species of animals that are not in the pasuk, and therefore maybe the forest goat, the very fact that we call it by its name as an independent name, maybe it's an independent species. So the Gemara rejects this. Im kain kol hani prate lamali. Why didn't the Torah just give me the simoni kashus and farta genesek? The Torah didn't have to give me a list. Apparently the list is an exhaustive list. Maskif Rav Acha Breder Rav Ika v'Dilma Mino de Aku Ninu. Okay, I'm going to agree to you and concede that there are only 10 categories, but there are categories of a chaya that we don't know how to identify. For example, we don't know what an ako is. Later on, the Gemara is going to say we don't know what a yakumor is. So why you assume that a forest goat is a behema? Maybe it's a chaya and it's a subcategory of ako. You'll tell me it doesn't look like an ako. Well, what does an ako look like? Nobody ever saw it because we don't know how to identify it. Amalei Rav Acha, another question that he poses, but this time to Rav Ashi, or to say to Rav Avia or Rav Ashi, but in any event, Dilma Mina Dita'o, O Dilma de Zemer Ninu. We have other chayos that are listed by the Torah, and we don't know how to identify them. Rav Chanan Rav Ashi Amemar Shori Tarbayu. So again, if we go back to Tarbayu, which we said was the forest goat, Amemar was mate the chelev of a forest goat. Now, the only way you could be mate the chelev of a forest goat is by assuming that it's a chaya, not a behema, because the chelev of a chaya is prohibited. So it's so fascinating because until now, we were trying to subcategorize a forest goat under a goat, which would make it a behema, which would mean that it's an iser chelev, and yet a memer was permissible with regard to the chelev of a forest goat. Apparently understood it was a chaya. So again, if we take a step back, in the discovery program of Eshat Torah, it's famous that one of the ways they prove the veracity of the Torah is that we never found, an 11th species that has these two simonim, and there are only 10. But one thing is clear: we don't always know whether something is a chaya or a behema. It's got to be somewhere in the 10, and we never found an 11th. But if somebody would come up with a new bria, and he, in the wilds of Australia, he's going to find some sort of creature that has, split hooves and rechews its cud. What we're going to say is that it might be included in one of the 10. So in a certain kind of sense, you're sort of like playing a word game here, because you're saying, well, no, you'll never find such a creature, but maybe you will find such a creature, but you're going to have to answer that it's one of the 10. Yeah, it's a little bit of a weak kind of proof. Boy mine Abba Rav Binyamin Barchia Merav Huna Barchia Honey easy de balo. Again, we're back to the forest code. Ma'ul legabim is be'ah. Is it a behema, and therefore we could shecht it and bring it on the altar, or is it a chaya, and then we don't have any chayas on the mizbeach? Omalei ad kan lo pligi Rav Yosef Rabbanon el b'shara bar. So we said that a shara bar was some sort of an animal, and we don't know. It's a wild ox, maybe it's a buffalo, whatever it might be. It's not clear whether it's a behema or a chaya. Disnan shora bar, according to the Tanakama, is min behemahu. It's basically a shor. Rabbi Yossi Omer min chaya. Right, it's very hard to domesticate it, and therefore it's a chaya. And Rabbanan, sorry, according to the Rabbanan, we're going to base ourselves on the Targum. This is fascinating to me because I very rarely see halacha that is determined by the Targum. So when you do Shnai Mikra V'Chet Targum, which I'm not so careful about that, I should be, but Targum is Torah Sheba'al Peh. And the Targum on the word turbula, right? He translates this turbula as a forest ox, and mina de behemahu. So we're going to derive a conclusion from the Targum that the wild ox is actually a behema, which means that according to Targum, we could bring a wild ox on the Mizbeach, and that's like the Rabbanon of this Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi Savar, Mida Kachashiv Lebahari Chayos Min Chayahu. We can't bring it on the Mizbeach because the Torah included it amongst the Chayos. Where is it included amongst the Chayos? Right, it's called the Tio. And we're saying that the forest ox is a Tio. And Tio is mentioned in the list of Chayos. So it's very interesting, even though the Targum calls it an ox, but he's referring to it in its scriptural, biblical word of Tio, which means that it's a Chaya. Avolhani, let's get back to the case of the goats, the forest goats. Divrei Kol Mina di Ezu. Everybody agrees that it's a behema. Maskifla of Achabreder of Ika Vidilma Mina di Aku Ninu. Here's another category of a undetermined chaya, namely an Ako. So maybe those forest goats really should be subcategorized under Ako, and therefore it's a chaya, not a behema. Amalei Ravina Ravashi. Another question: Vidilma mina de ta'o o mina de zemer, as we asked before. Amalei Rav Chanan Ravashi. Amemar shari tarbele. As we saw, Amemar says that the forest goats you can eat its chelev, which must mean by definition that's a chaya and not a behema. Ketzar shochet. Right, we go back to the Mishnah. Omar Rabbi Yoshaya Kula Maslisin Deloka Rabbi Shimon. The entire Mishnah in terms of Osov Espino is against Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon is going to hold that Shchita Sheina Ruya Lav Shmei Shchita Mimai Midaktani. The Mishnah says that if you shecht a mother and its offspring on the same day, then kodshim bachutz, let's say he shechted both the mother and the offspring, which were kodshim, outside the Azara, harishon chayiv kares, shneim psulim u'shneim sofkin esarbaim, meaning there's a violation of the Torah of kodshim bachutz. Both of these were violated. The only difference is that the first shchit of kodshim bachutz, of let's say the mother, that's going to incur kares. The second one will not incur kares, it will only incur lashes, meaning malchus. Why is the second shochet of the offspring exonerated from kares? Because it's what we call kodem zmano. Why is it kodem zmano? Because you can't shech the offspring on the same day. So you can't bring the carbon on the same day. You have to wait till tomorrow. So it's mechusas man, and if it's mechusas man, then there's no iser kodshim bachutz. Kodshim bachutz only applies when you could have brought it bifnim, but here you couldn't have brought it bifnim because you have to wait a day. On the other hand, you're going to get malchus for oso v'espino, and that's against Reb Shimon. Michti shamina le Reb Shimon di Omar shchita sheina ru'uya lo shmei shchita. And in the case of kodshim, it's considered shchita sheina ru'uya because Reb Shimon holds if the shchita is not mate the achila, then it's not shchita, and it doesn't engender an iser of oso v'espino. And why is it that the shchita of kodshim is considered eina ru'uya? Because it doesn't permit consumption, because you have to wait until he's zorik the dam. That's as far as Peyom and Aleph is concerned.